listeners, if you guys actually follow the video feed too, I'm actually going to fire the video back up again. I give up on you, Facebook.
Thanks, Mark Zuckerberg.
Facebook Live. You guys want us to be shooting these live videos all the time, but apparently you can't give us good cell phone coverage. Well, I should really blame. I guess we should be blaming the cell phone networks, not Facebook.
Verizon.
We'll hold them all accountable. But we'll still get some good video content so we can mix it in with the show. Because it's, again, in the end, it's about audio. But back to your point on this whole summer to fall transition, your phone rings more. There's more people concerned with that lifestyle transition of like, oh, darn, my summers are done, I'm back in school, for example.
Yes.
Now, and we've talked about this before, you guys are, I guess you guys are really centered around mostly athletes.
Yes.
But you have other domains of mind of the athlete. You have the professional division, you work with companies and stuff like that, and employees. So, but really most of it is your youth athletes.
Yep, so most are our individual athletes and then athletic teams and speaking. And so as teams are now starting to come back together, then those engagements start to happen. The new season brings new responsibility and promise, but then also sometimes new stressors and different situations that arise, which then we have the ability to come in and help as best we can to just help whatever stressor or situations at the current time that team or that group of people transition through it as successfully and positively as possible. So it's the fall I think really turns back on, and another point which we haven't even really hit on is then the weather. And so there ultimately now we have reached the max of the longest day of the year, and now we're going to start slowly but surely shrinking back the other way.
And I noticed it too, just being an athletic guy. Like my mountain biking season is perfect right now because it's hotter, but I can ride until 9 p.m. at night without even needing headlights.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
It's incredible. And Michigan, the fireworks couldn't start until like 10:15, 10:30 because it was still bright outside at 9:45 at night because it's so north. It was incredible. But we in talking about the sun and vitamin D, it definitely impacts our mood levels. And so in the fall, some people notice that seasonal affective component of then their moods just starting to drop with the days shortening, and now things are darker, not as much sunlight, and so there's that as well, just compounded on top of just the transition and kind of diving back into the more structured and scheduled life.
Yeah, well, some people talk about how, actually, I saw this last night on a documentary. They were talking about like seasonal affective disorder or affective
Seasonal affective disorder.
Yeah, so that's a thing, right?
It's totally a thing.
I'll be a devil's advocate. Like, I really do feel like we've all become a bunch of pussies, and there's a disorder for everything. But you're the professional, so please correct me.
A lot of it is really speaking to vitamin D levels, and Erin, our sport nutritionist, she is even notably more knowledgeable on different levels. But ultimately, we get into a deficit being that we're not exposed to the sunlight as frequently and as often, especially in levels or in areas such as the Northeast.
Well, let's be real about that too. The vitamin D levels are not just the sun; it is back to your nutrition because your body can only absorb and then process, and then your D consumption or production is related back to your diet as well, which is why Erin gets involved so heavily.
Right, and so there is that, and so we're just missing and that natural resource of just simply going outside and getting that in addition to the nutrition. It's not there as frequently or as readily, and so there is a component in a deficit. And so some people, I know we, a lot of times in our podcasts, or the times that I have the ability to be here with you, we talk a lot about awareness. Like, that's always a theme. And so people that are aware and start to pay attention to mood fluctuations at times will notice, and that's where that seasonal affective component comes in, that in the winter times and in the fall and those areas where the weather isn't that great, they're not able to be outside, their mood does dip.
Oh, God, yeah. I see it. That's why I think I love being a skier, because that's one of the worst times of the year, obviously, for that. But I'm still at least being active. And yeah, a lot of people get that cabin type of fever thing by the end of the, I guess that's the thing, right? By the end of the winter, you're tired of being kept out. You want more sun, you want more exposure. And I think a lot of people use the winter as a crutch or as an excuse. And I'm like, listen, make the most out of everything. Like, get outside. I mean, it's like, granted, you and I were just talking before we started the recording today that I decided to do a Spartan Super last weekend. I'm not sure if I would want to do a Spartan Super on Blue Mountain Ski Resort again in the middle of winter.
Yeah, that's a hard choice.
I mean, admittedly, you also look at the schedule of the Spartan race series. They purposely aren't planning these races in the middle of winter.
Right, and if they do, they're in warmer climates, because I think when I did my East, it was in like February, March, but it was in Sacramento. And so it was, or maybe that was, I think that was in April, and then I think the beast I did was in Las Vegas, and that was in February or something, you know, and so
in Vegas you're guaranteed usually
it
pretty
is
good weather.
guaranteed desert out there, and so they there can't put one in August because it would be just too hot the other way, and so they're really smart how they strategically place those races out. But yeah, Blue Mountain in the wintertime, I don't think is one that they would do. One that they continually miss though, they have a sprint in Malibu every December.
What?
And at that point in time in Malibu, if it's a nice weekend, it's lovely. But if it's raining, and that's one of the times that it can rain, or that it does tend to rain, it gets chilly. And so I think I did that sprint 2 or 3 times, and every single time I did it that particular weekend, it would be raining and mudsliding, and it was just chilly because you would be up on the mountains and there's a lot of wind, and it's like 40 degrees and raining, and you're just not necessarily, it's chilly.
Well, since we're on this subject, interesting transition, but you said we may end up actually geeking out about Spartan. You've done more Spartans than I have. I've done a lot of obstacle course racing, OCRs like civilian military combine and Tough Mudders and Spartans and all that stuff. And actually, when I lived in Colorado, I used to do some contract work with an obstacle course racing company, right? And I actually traveled out to Boston from Colorado to help them run a race up there. I ran a couple in Colorado, but so your point of view is why do you think Blue Mountain is listed as one of the hardest terrains to do? Because we're right here in Pennsylvania, we don't have a lot of altitude.
Right.
We have a lot of rock.
Well, and that's the thing. It's for their sprint series, they generally aim for a 3 to 5 mile.
Right.
Blue Mountain is the longer.
It's like 7.
It's right. It's for even their sprints. It's longer.
Yeah.
If it's not, I know one of the years it was the longest sprint in their series.
Well, 2014 we tracked it. I think we were closer to 7 or 8 miles.
It's a long one. Yeah. And then just the terrain of it's rocky, but it's loose rock. Yep. And so going up and down, and so I think they attribute it to not only the length of that sprint, because the one in Malibu, I mean, it was
something
3 miles. You're
Malibu.
going up hills, but it was such a short. I mean, I've done these. My brother and I, that was kind of our thing we would do together, and so we would fly and meet each other and do races, and then have the opportunity to hang out when we were living not anywhere near each other, and so. In Malibu, I mean, we ripped through that course. It was a 5K, but the one in Pennsylvania is on the longer side. Plus, the terrain is just that really like.
The funny thing is, it's not like they can't like GPS these courses. So like they could technically make it their 3 to 5 mile course, but they just seem to not do it.
I think they maybe now the Blue Mountain one is starting to get known
because
as the hardest
reputation.
sprint, and so now they want to just keep it that way.
Well, it's funny because when I looked at the map. It's basically the same exact course from sprint to super. Obviously, they add another whole chunk on for the super. And I think the sprint was at least 24 obstacles, 25 maybe. And then I just remember there was, I think when I did the math, there was seven more obstacles for the super. That's all it was.
Oh, wow.
There was only 7 more than the sprint.
Wow.
So, have you done a super? Or you've only done base and sprint?
No, I did the trifecta, so we did all 3. Yep.
Okay.
And so I don't remember the amount of obstacles in them, but they were between the beast and the super. I remember it being definitely more than the sprint, at least the Malibu one, for sure.
Yeah, I think when I did the math, I think it might have come out to it was like 20 to 29 or 22 to 27, 20, whatever. I think it's only a 7 obstacle difference. And one thing I also attribute to their distance and measurement issues is that you can tell on the map they just draw a line over a photograph of the mountain. So I don't know if anyway, besides me wearing a Garmin watch, is actually going out and actually GPSed it. But the other thing I think they don't really account for is they're measuring distance from obstacle to obstacle and not including whatever little distances are included in the obstacle. So for example, like the bucket of rock up and down the hill.
Right.
Or the sandbags up and down the hill. Those are additional distances they're not really adding into it's 3 to 5 miles.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. So now, on the Spartan thing, since you are our resident sports psychologist, I love OCRs just like any other endurance sport for myself because of the mindset piece.
Yes.
And I was just, not for geeking out, I was going to have you chime in on this one. And the listeners will appreciate this, but you have to agree that, yeah, there's an adrenaline junkie piece to this, but there is that piece, like, you don't have to go and run a marathon, like, you can go do a Spartan sprint. And I don't care who you are, everybody will then have to tap into a mental component at some point, or repetitively throughout the race.
Right.
And it doesn't matter how many times you've done it, you probably still have to get to that point where it's like, okay, I'm exhausted, I gotta mentally keep going.
Yes. And I think those with, I I think there's all different types of people, you know, and I know for myself personally, the idea of doing an obstacle race is 100 times nicer than doing a half marathon or something that I'm just running.
Since I've already done marathons and half
straight
marathons,
through.
I would rather do an OCR
Right,
race.
and so in thinking of the OCRs, they definitely break up that monotony, and so mentally I think that's helpful for some people. Other people, the thought of that, and they just like that steady state running, and so it's kind of getting awareness of where mentally you fall as your strength, you know, which one you kind of prefer.
Right.
And then with the Spartans, it's, you know, there, like you said, there is definitely a point, whether it's you're looking at an obstacle and you have to, you know, scale this wall that is, you know, notably bigger than you are, and there's I think the interesting thing about the obstacle courses in comparisons to straight running is it ultimately taps into a little bit of fear. There's something that I remember being in the one in Malibu where we had to go up a cargo net and we were on top of the mountain, and at one point as being on top of the cargo net while having to get on top of a mountain and crossing this cargo net with, you know, 20 feet below me on top of the mountain, just like that perspective and vantage point is pretty intimidating. And so I think it's, you know,
and you don't really have a fear of heights. That's
but it's just in that situation you become aware of your surroundings and you're like, oh my goodness, what in the world am I doing? This is crazy. And so I think it, you know, it definitely pushes you, whether it's endurance wise or challenging in that way, to a maximum limit.
Yeah.
And so in going through those races, something that's very helpful is really taking it one obstacle at a time, or one, you know, and not, you know, yes, you know that maybe the monkey bars or scaling out of the sandbags are coming up, but right now you're on the bouldering wall.
Yeah.
And so this now just has to be what you're focused on. You don't need to stress about this obstacle and the three.
And that's a great point for the listeners, is like, we talk a lot, we brought this up on past episodes about situational awareness in life, and you don't have to be in life-threatening situations, but this concept of situational awareness or planning or taking on these life challenges mentally and physically, I think too many people take on too much. And in an OCR, it is literally one obstacle at a time, one hill sprint or speed hike at a time, and they literally use the whole damn ski hill up Blue Mountain. Like
they do.
It just, you look up and you see people way up there, and you're like, I'm not running this. I'm just gonna set a speed pace. I'm just gonna speed hike it, you know. And just because everybody, and it's funny because you see people doubling over and like grabbing the legs and stopping and breathing, and me, just from my experience in life and the firefighting baths and everything else in there, I set my vision and I just go. I'm not going turbo, but I pass people. I was passing a lot of people on that course just because they're stopping and they're taking risks, and I just train differently. I do things differently. I have that mental game. I don't know if you've done the same thing.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, when you see someone up in front of you struggling, it's then putting the idea into your mind of, oh man, this must be really hard.
Yeah.
If they can't do it, neither can I. I mean, even, no joke, this actually happened to me last night. I was at a CrossFit class over at SYR, and we were doing L-sits, and we were doing EMOM of, you know, dips on the rings and then 30-second L-sits. Okay. And the one coach said, you know, like, yeah, you know, the record today, out of 5 of them, someone was able to do 4. And automatically in my head, I was like, oh, well, if the best person today could only do 4 L-sits for 30 seconds, there is no way I can do. If that best
but who was
today,
that best person?
And it was, you know, one of like the harder athletes at their gym that, you know, and who definitely goes more consistently than I do. So automatically that, like, I like noticed, I was like, wow, that mental block literally just crawled in there. And so in thinking of, you know, those races, it's sometimes seeing those people ahead of you struggling, and even knowing some of the obstacles coming up, where it's like, oh man, I know that one's I'm kind of stressed about, or maybe in a race before I didn't do super well.
Right.
You know, it can definitely get in the way and ultimately prevent you from, you know, whatever that potential might be that day, and you're just stressed the whole time. And so it's really a challenge, but it's ultimately, you know, there's a reason why horses have blinders on. So they can't see the other people, they can't see the other horses, you know. And so it's, if you are able to be one step at a time, focusing on you, and hey, I'm just making it up this hill, or I'm making it to that tree. I'm not looking at anything else, kind of like what you said, like I'm kind of looking at this focal point, and that's where I want to get. Maybe I'm not going to be the fastest person getting there, but that's where I'm going, that's what I'm seeing, that's what I'm focusing on, one step at a time, and really breaking it down into those doable chunks.
I can tell you, I mean, it was literally this simple. I come around the corner, and I look up, I'm like, oh, great, we're doing another hill climb again. And at Blue Mountain, they make you do a lot of hill climbs. And I'm like, all right. And I see people setting their different paces, and everybody's stopping, and you see people start walking backwards because it works their muscles differently.
Played that game,
and I'm like, I'm not doing that. Anyway, so I set my pace, and then I'm seeing people doubling over. And again, me being the coach, I see people like if you double over, by the way, you literally like cut off the expansion of your diaphragm, so it makes it harder to breathe. So, little tip. So, for
I did that
example,
last night after the house.
even in workouts, right? I'm always telling people, like, you get done in a CrossFit workout. People are like, pardon the microphone here for a second. They double over and they're like, and like, I can't breathe. They're like, stand up, shoulders back, allow your chest to open, allow it to fully inflate.
Yeah.
When you double over, you compress the lower part of your rib cage, that diaphragm area, so those lungs can't fully inflate. I want to allow my diaphragm to open and fully inflate. So when I'm hiking, it flashed me back to my days of doing a wildland fire. I had a pack on and I had a chainsaw. I couldn't double over, or else the weight of the chainsaw would have just sent me doubling over. I would have fell over. So your shoulders are back. Your back is, everything is, you have good posture and you're just hiking up that mountain. So that's what I do. I literally just look up the mountain, I pick my spot where I have to go, set the shoulders, good big lungs, and I just go. So I don't have a breathing problem. I just see people just stopping and doubling over and breathing, and I'm like, let's go. And that's my other hiking tip.
Makes sense.
So that's why when I take people hiking, they hate me because I don't have to be training to just hike with. And this isn't a brag. It's what I've programmed from doing that 2 years. It took my hiking experience from like decent to like a whole different level. That's why when I moved to Colorado, I started hiking 14ers because those are such long hikes, like 14,000 foot peaks. It's like, you gotta know how to hike.
Yeah.
And you want to get up and down that mountain before you run out of daylight or bad weather rolls in and everything else. It's a whole different lifestyle. So Spartan racing it was really cool because I hadn't done a Spartan since 14 and a big sprint. So going back and doing the super, yeah, could I have trained more for it? Sure. But it was just interesting where my brain went during the race. Like you were saying, like, hey, sometimes you got to pick one obstacle or one transition at a time. And literally that's where my brain went. I just said, okay, I'm just doing this. And this is how I'm going to do it. And then my brain pulled from past experiences and saying, okay, I have to breathe like this and I have to hike like this and I have to keep my posture like this. But that's life experience. Not everybody has that.
Right.
But that's why I think people like you and I sharing best practices here, go out and challenge yourself to do these crazy, weird, like some people say, dude, you're crazy doing that stuff. But let's go to the science here, the brain stuff. This is what I really count on you for. Isn't it true that every time we try something different, we've never done before, challenge ourselves differently, at the cellular level or the synaptic level, we're creating new pathways in the brain. Are we not?
Yeah, we're always, the fascinating thing about the brain is it's always growing and learning. I mean, yes, there is an age and things where that definitely is a decline and it slows down in the growth of it.
Sure.
But, as we're trying and accomplishing new things and learning new things, there are new connections that are made and created. And that's how then when you, as you were saying, go back the next time, remember how it was done.
Yeah.
And so, there's that in the challenge of itself. But then there's also, in coming to how it then ultimately makes us feel, those senses of accomplishment that you get. That sense of after you cross the finish line of whether it's, a 5K, a color run, or a
you're high on
Spartan.
life. Yeah.
It's just, and something that when I talk about body image a lot, it's, we focus so much on the limits of our body, of, I don't look this way, or I don't have that, or my muscles aren't big enough, or this, or like, whatever it is, male or female, we all have those thoughts, and rather the thoughts on that, rather than, wow, my body was just able to get through 10 miles of this hellacious course. It doesn't matter what time it was, like, holy crap, like, I was able, and you reflect back on, oh my goodness, I was able to do this or that obstacle, and maybe it was better than last time, or the first time ever I've tried something like this. You get, ultimately, your dopamine gets released. I mean, that's a high, which then helps you feel good.
And let's be real, there's going to be that crash afterwards, right? Like you do such a powerful event like that, the next day or two, you might be high for a day or two, and then it eventually comes down. And this goes back to like addictions and everything else. That's a whole different show. But the whole point is, it's like, guys, like, get these highs in your life because you want these positive experiences. Because something that I do when I cross the finish line nowadays, I don't necessarily. It's weird. I don't necessarily get I get a little high, obviously, but I actually, when I crossed the finish line this time, I knew a friend of mine was there also racing, so I looked around for her first. Then I just started looking at other people crossing the finish line with the same color wristband, so I knew what heat they started in. Like we didn't start at 8:45 in the morning after the elite crew went. And a friend of mine was raced in the elite crew, so she had to go race against the top people. But she's been training for that. And and real quick, just so you guys understand, like I ran like a 3:31 on the sport, and the top guy ran a 1:30 or a 1:31 or something like that. I'm like
That's
2 hours faster than me, which means when I was setting my shoulders and opening my chest and speed hiking that hill, they were probably running.
You're running.
Yeah. So there's your training wake-up call, guys. Like I didn't train for
There's
it.
the humbling.
Yeah, but like that's the point also too. Is like guys, like you don't need to be a top athlete. You know, these races for a lot of people is about finishing.
Yep.
Even if it takes you 4 hours, 5 hours. I was passing people that were in earlier heats, and I'm like, good job, guys, stay with it. And I'm sure they probably maybe looked at my color or my wristband or whatever and knew that I started after them. Who cares? Because in the end, when I'm in that finisher, I'm looking around and I start seeing people that I passed coming across, and you're high-fiving each other. And or if there was that one guy that you maybe gave a hand on the obstacle because some of the obstacles are pretty rough, like that one 8-foot wall. Dude, you know about the 8-foot wall. There's a lot of different walls, but they put the 8-foot wall, like, I think it's like the 6th or 7th from the finish. So like you've already run up and down all the hills, and you've already gone through, I think we already went through the water hazards, like through their holding ponds. So you're already wet, and you're tired. And that 8-foot wall, dude, when I jumped up on that damn thing, it was ridiculous because your calves are so tight. It's 8 feet, and I'm 6'4". But even me, like I'm doing my pull up, and I go to kick my leg over and just do a little calf grab with my heel as well, and your leg's going to cramp up instantly. Everybody's like, "Oh my God, calf muscle cramp!" And I'm like, "Nah, it won't happen to me." Sure enough, so I literally jumped back down and did not do it, and I tried and like rubbed it out. I'm like, "All right, I'm going to do it again," and I felt it want to go again. I'm like, "Screw it, just push through," right? Mental over physical. So even people like me, like, okay, I purposely dropped weight so I can run faster, and like, I'm not throwing as much body mass over these obstacles. So I think I'm down like 185 right now. So I dropped like a solid 5 pounds just for that race, and I want to put that back on. But there's people there with all different body types. Who cares, man? There's some people that are overweight. There's some people that are carrying a lot in the midsection. There's people that are older, younger. There's couples doing it together. Dear God, you're crazy. I did my first Spartan with Kristen and her girlfriends. And luckily, she's a competitive like I am, because then about halfway through the race, those girls were not endurance trained. So they basically, she looked at me and she's like, "Okay, Scott, we can break off now." I'm like, "Thank God," because I'm like running in place, bored as hell. And I'm like, "You guys are killing me." I'm throwing each girl over the walls. I'm like, "Guys, seriously." And I was going to do that one by myself. That's why I came back to the Super Bowl. And it sounds like you've done all yours together.
Yep. So my brother and I would do them, and I think that's, you know, as you're saying, as you're going through the race, sometimes in the obstacles things kind of get clogged up a little bit. So you do
there's choke points.
Yep. And so you sort of start to become aware, and because you for the whole, you know, whether it's 10 miles, 13